What is up, basketball fans? I am Jason Burgos for Sportsnaut, and I have the pleasure of being joined by an individual who has had a very unique influence on the outstanding HBO series Winning Time, The Rise of the Lakers Dynasty, and that is the show's basketball producer, Idan Ravin. Senor Ravin! Thanks so much for the time today.
Hey, Jason, thanks for having me.
So, have a bunch of questions. First one is, talk to me just first about like this unique journey to this point of working on this like highly respected HBO series. What eventually brought you to the sport originally? Maybe in your youth, maybe not. And what was like your path to building this reputation as a coach, as an advisor for television shows? Because like the book you wrote, the Hoops Whisperer, that's exactly where you are.
Oh, I appreciate the kind words, man. I've spent many years in the world of sports and athletic performance. I've probably trained over 100 NBA players and more than 15 NBA All-Stars, everyone from Carmelo to Kevin Durant, Chris Paul, Steph Curry, James Harden, LeBron. I've worked with everyone. It's been a great career. I got a call a few years ago from Adam McKay's people, and the call was, "Hey, do you think you could turn one of our actors into Magic Johnson?" And I laughed. There are 400 guys in the NBA who can't be Magic Johnson. But if there's anyone that can do this, I'm sure I can. And I asked what the timeline was, and they said, well, "How's a week?" And I laughed again,
Oh.
thinking, "Man, you can't turn Bruce Lee into a black belt overnight. But let me fly out to LA. Let me see what this is, and I'll let you know." So I flew out to LA. I met with Quincy, and Quincy was a former college football lineman. So he was a good athlete, but he wasn't necessarily like a basketball athlete. It's two different sort of athletic responsibilities in each sport. So I went back and I said to Adam, I said, I think there's going to be three phases to this development. The first is to turn Quincy into more of a basketball athlete, more quicker, agile, the ability to kind of maneuver through 94 by 50 feet, smoother, more horizontal power, better balanced. But that's the first phase. Then the next phase is to build all the technical skills that you need to be able to shoot, dribble, pass, understand basketball, understand defense, understand situations. Because lots of moments on a set where the director will want some type of improvisation. And then the last phase is to turn them into silhouette of the characters. So you're not just playing John Smith, you're playing them one of the most iconic basketball players in history. So everything you do has to feel correct. The way you pass, the way you move, the way you run, the way you jump, the way you shoot, the way you do the way you dribble. And everything has to be done while you're delivering dialogue or communicating the emotional beats of a story. So it's a very sort of complex process. Um, and it was something that just like the structure was working and the executives were very happy with it. And so they asked me if I could do all the other characters and all the other people. So it became Norm Nixon, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Michael Cooper, Dr. J, Larry Bird, all the iconic Jamal Wilkes, all the iconic people that you see on the show. Then from there, it became responsible for all the basketball-related castings, for help interpreting the script and advising on basketball-related matters, and for building that and choreographing all the scenes that I would read in the scripts that had to just be depicted in a very cinematic way in order to push the story along. So over time, the scope of the work grew tremendously, but it's been, very, very, very interesting. A little bit different than working with like a high level NBA player, but at the same time, not because you're still in the process of the world of performance.
What to that's obviously a tough thing, and when Adam McKay seeks you out for this thing to turn someone into Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Larry Bird, and all that kind of stuff, what's your preparation like for this? Because obviously you know the game and understand it, but are there any levels of preparation you have to get in terms of video watching or anything like that to because you got to mimic these people. You're not just teaching them the game to be better at the game. So what was your preparation like before even working with the actors?
So it's a great question. I mean, like I'm very familiar with with every player, so I just spent a lot of time watching it and just trying to figure out like what were the sort of the unique signaling points that each actor had, that each player at that level, the iconic players did, that you would go, oh yeah, that's the Magic. Oh yeah, that's a
Mm,
Dr. J. Because lots of people can
yeah.
dribble, shoot, and pass, right? But there's something that each one does that's their own sort of signature. So first identifying that, then figuring out how do I get the actor to that point? Because like I said, most of them were football players. So, how do you get Wilkes
Mm,
to that jump shot? That's a really, really hard process, man.
yeah.
Especially someone's not used to having a ball in their hand, someone's not used to shooting. So it's just figuring out like how you get from point A to point Z and how do you build that program. And that took a lot of time.
What would you say? Because everybody has their own approach to teaching the game and explaining the
Yeah,
game. Like, what would you
right.
say is your approach to doing it? Because everybody, maybe some are people tough love, maybe some people are a little bit more soft, and it's always so many ways to do it. What would you say is your approach to teaching players and these actors? And what were your major influences in how you approach coaching, teaching, all those elements?
Well, so in terms of influences, it's always been me. Like I haven't had a coach or a mentor. I didn't play organized basketball past high school. I don't know Larry Brown. I'm not friends with Adam Silver or I don't know anyone. So I've always had to build my own methodology through my own instincts and my own education. So in terms of influences, zero, just my own brain. In terms of methodology, I think the things that you refer to are I would call tone, right? It's one thing how like the tone you deliver a message, but it's another thing to understand how like pedagogy and how do you teach and how do people learn. And that to me is something that I've studied a lot and I have a lot of experience with. So pedagogy is just, how do you build programs? How do you regress? How do you progress? How do people conceptualize the problem? How they solve the problem? It's not just, do I give you a hug? Do I say something with a soft voice or an aggressive voice? Do I give positive reinforcements? To me, those are tone questions. They're not like education
Mm,
methodology questions, right?
right.
So essentially we would do drills and then I would kind of watch like how were they learning these drills, and then I'd ask myself, okay, how do I reframe the question? How do I reframe the process? How do I like make a change here and a change there? That's something that becomes would stay in, like, again, I call it would fall in their body, that they would really become intuitive. And a lot of it's sort of by feel. I mean, sometimes I give the example of, when you're making a dish, sometimes you just have to taste it as you go along.
Yeah,
And then you
yeah.
know, do I add some salt, do I add some pepper? Do I like you just I was constantly tasting versus just being guided by a recipe. And that's
Mm.
part of, I think, my methodology is that like I'm guided by my own instinct and my own tasting.
Talk to me about again like the casting process because obviously you worked with Quincy early, but when they
Yeah.
start filling out more of the roster and all these different people and all these different actors and the people they have to then mirror, like how much influence in that process was there? What was the process like? Did just actors have to come in and play some basketball and you kind of almost scout them in a way? Is it really not that they're just looking for a good actor and then they say, hey, here, Idan, make something out of this? How was that process like after just Quincy?
So there's some of the Lakers roster that I cast, and then a lot of the other player teams that they play against, I was responsible for casting as well. It's hard. You'd think in the cities like LA or New York that there's thousands of basketball players to pick from, but the truth is it's more slim pickings than you think,
Mm,
because the really good ones are playing somewhere.
yeah.
The ones that used to play, they physically are not capable to do 16-hour days, right?
Mm,
Then I'm not looking for the Instagram player or necessarily the street baller, because I need someone who's more selfless and not trying to self promote on social media, because it's a very selfless show, right? It has to fit into the organizational culture and sort of the essence of the show, which is, you might have 4 million followers on Instagram, but I need you to sit on the bench for 14 hours. Are you willing to do that?
mm,
Uh, then there's sometimes it's you need I couldn't have the modern day athlete because they're too jacked, because during that period no one had big biceps and big shoulders,
yeah, that's
eyes, right?
true.
So the sample size kept on getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and it was very hard to find things, right? And there was, you had to match skin tones, you had to match body types, you had to match length, you had to match, there were so many things you had to match so that it felt like you were actually watching the a period piece. So then eventually, like, I found guys from all over the country, and like almost a group of 30, 40, 50 guys that really you could repurpose for different teams, that just fell in line with all the different criteria that you were looking for. Then there was some very iconic faces that I remember going, oh, I'm going to make sure I use you for a lot of things. So our Dennis Johnson character, I remember I first met him, I thought, you're Dennis Johnson. But this was before we had shot any Celtic stuff. But I just knew
Mm,
that when I saw him in an audition, I go, I make sure I had to hold on to you for future in the future. Um, so the casting it was really tough, because there's so many things that you have to take into consideration
yeah.
when you are selecting people. Are there some guys that I pick that are not elevated basketball players? Sure, but they work, right? And there's some guys that were really elevated basketball players that I picked as well. So like, their basketball ability wasn't the number one thing that I was looking for.
Mm. Speaking of the ability part, because Quincy Isaiah, Solomon Hughes, Sean Patrick Small, like they really, for a lot of people watch the show and fans of the sport, they've really stood out in their these playing these iconic roles, stuff like that. But when you're going through that process, and were there any, in terms of the actors that were like early on when you're starting to do the practicing and getting onto the basketball techniques and everything, that like this guy's really good. I'm not gonna have to do much with him. Were there any standouts like that? Like, yep, he was perfect. Little work with him.
Yeah, like Solomon is a very high level player, so there's a lot of stuff that he didn't have to do with Solomon. But
Yeah.
the stuff that was so iconic, like those skyhooks, that required more time.
Yeah.
Devon Nixon is an absolutely fantastic athlete. I mean, fantastic. So you didn't really have to worry so much about like how quick he was or how fast he was, but you just had to make sure that he mirrored Norm Nixon and make sure he did it in that context. So like everyone had a sort of a like their own sort of special gift to them, but the key was like how do we turn them into their characters,
Mm.
right? Like Sean Small is like so devoted and such a good student that over a course of a year and a half, everyone who's watched the show goes, "Oh my God, Larry Bird is amazing," and I say,
Yes.
"He is. He
Yep.
truly is. He is just gone above and beyond and put so much time and effort into this role, and I'm so happy to see him shine. He deserves it."
Since the show has been out, there's been mixed thoughts about certain portrayals. I think most agree it's a very good show, but obviously, like the take on Jerry West has been somewhat divisive, and there's been some blowback on that. But for you, have you received opinions from inside Hollywood, from just inside the game of basketball, and for what you and the actors have done to not only just make this a really entertaining dramedy, but like a true blue, legit basketball show, which there's not many of?
I think that everyone that approached me has marveled at like how accomplished and how authentic and how
Yes.
cinematic all the basketball looks like. And I think
Yeah.
from an insider standpoint, I think they understand that we built the Empire State Building.
Yeah.
I mean, it's monumental what these actors have done. It's like no other. I mean, it's like I said, it's one thing to play a basketball player. It's another thing to play those characters.
Yes.
Right. It's like I think, I appreciate everyone's opinion. I appreciate Magic's opinion and and Jerry West's opinion and Kareem's opinion. But from my perspective, like I try to do my best to honor them and to show reverence for them because these were people that I admired growing up. So I did everything in my power to make sure that, that our actors truly represented them at the highest levels. So if anything, like I'm showing honor to Kareem and to
Mm-hmm.
Magic, all these players that I admired growing up because I that's how much I admire them.
Did any of these legends that you had to have these actors mirror and mimic, did they ever come onto the set? Did you ever talk to them in advance to just to
No,
get tips and stuff like that?
no, because like they didn't, right? And like in many ways, I wasn't looking for other people's insight, right? I felt pretty confident what I needed to be done. And so I wasn't looking for having too many cooks in the kitchen. I think it complicates the process. It's already complicated enough.
Mm-hmm.
But my end goal was to be able to truly honor Magic Johnson, truly honor Kareem, truly honor Jamal Wilkes, truly honor Larry Bird. These are my childhood heroes. So I was going to do everything in my power to make sure I honored them and made sure they were fantastic. And at the same time, I had a fiduciary responsibility to the show, to these characters, to my response, to my role, and I was going to honor that as well.
Last question. Since we are talking basketball, I always like to get an interview subjects to give me an all-time list on something they are an expert in. Obviously, you know the game of basketball. You're an expert. So instead of asking the typical, oh, who's the five greatest, NBA players of all time in your opinion, just tell me who are your favorite NBA players of all time. For example, like for me, John Starks is a top five for me. I just loved him as a player,
Yeah.
and I just love what he does. Who's your favorites?
Um, I loved Isaiah Thomas.
Mm.
I love George Gervin. I love Jerry. I love Larry Bird. I love Steph Curry. I love LeBron. Um, I think Katie is remarkable. I think if you've ever been in a gym with Chris Paul, you don't realize how absolutely special he is. Um, he's a regular sized guy with a regular everything, and yet he's one of the greatest in history. It's hard to explain how special Chris is until you actually get to spend some time with him. Um, who else? Something very special about Carmelo Anthony, just how talented I believe he was. And in some ways, I almost, I worked with him 13, 14 years. I almost felt that he kind of underachieved. I believe
Mm.
that he could have been one of the greatest of the greatest of the greatest of the greatest. Because under my time with him, I saw remarkable stuff, and he sat on top of the world. Who else? Yeah, like I think, I feel very fortunate because I've seen all of them in ways that are very vulnerable and transparent. I've seen like their highs, their lows. But in terms of like who I would say the greatest, it's hard for me to say that. It's like comparing Ferraris and Lamborghinis, right? They're all great, right?
Yeah.
But I think, when people say to me, could Larry Bird excel during the 2023 NBA season? I'm like, oh, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, you're looking at 6'9" with 26-foot range, shoots
Yep.
left-handed, shoots right-handed. Like, I mean, the guy's more than awesome. I mean, he's awesomist, right?
Mm.
Could Magic Johnson be great now? Oh, you're
Yep.
looking at 6'9" again. I mean, these
Yep.
guys were they were unicorns before they were unicorns.